Hi, I'm Tom Stephenson, and welcome to Tools, Techniques, and Mental Models for Success series. In today's session, we're going to be looking at careers in construction, the many pathways to a successful calling. I'm a professor in construction management, and I kind of grew up in the construction industry. I did a couple of trades, carpentry, brick and stone masonry, did some apprenticeships, managed a family-run business, was a project manager, have taught at the college for a number of years, and at the same time done a lot of consulting with big, large construction businesses. So I kind of know a lot about the different roles and what it takes to be successful in them. And I get a lot of people that are interested in the construction industry, given that it is one of those industries that has been pretty resilient as far as change goes. And we're going to talk a little bit about the different areas in construction. We're going to be talking about tradespersons. We're going to be talking about management positions, estimating positions, give you a really good sense of the industry and what it takes. And do you need a 4-year degree to be successful? Do you need a license in a particular trade to be successful? Some of the pluses and minuses. And I'll try to give it to you as straight as possible. I've experienced a lot of different things in my life this way, and I see how the industry is moving and changing and adjusting and pivoting, and how it also stays the same. So we'll have a good little discussion on this, and hopefully you'll come away with a good perspective on whether this is an area where maybe this could be a job for you, a career for you, or my preference, a calling for you. So let's get into it. So when I think about the construction industry, I think about it like this big circle of information. It's kind of like the world, in the galaxies. And we say that they're always expanding, the galaxies and the universe. And construction's kind of like that. There's a lot of sectors to construction. There's renovation. When you think about renovation and remodeling, every building that's ever been built, if it's going to stay up, it's going to be renovated, or it's going to have restoration work on it. And restoration's a related cousin of renovations. It can be historic restoration. It can be restoration of newer buildings, trying to get them back to whatever state they were built into. And there is a lot of work in this area because there are more buildings that have been built than new buildings going up. So it is a very resilient sector, and a very big, very big sector. So depending what country you live in, it could be the dominant sector. If you're in the UK, it would likely be the dominant sector. If you're in North America, very close to being dominant. Canada, the dominant sector. So very big for opportunities there. Civil infrastructure. Well, what do we take to drive to work? We take roads, we take subways, we take go over bridges. So there's all of these things that are part of our infrastructure. We also have things like water treatment facilities that ensure that the population has good drinkable, potable water. All these things get built by construction workers, and it's a huge industry. So that's another sector, whole big sector, quite different though from renovation and restoration. High-rise residential. So we have condominium towers. If you live in an urban center, New York, Los Angeles, London, Toronto, Vancouver, these are big urban centers, lots of high-rise residential condominiums and apartments. Lots of opportunities. People need to live in these places. A lot of people migrating to these cities. They're growing. And so highest and best use. We tear down some low-rise buildings. We put up some towers. Big opportunities that way. ICI projects. So ICI projects, we've got institutional, commercial, industrial projects under that. Lots of things, shopping malls, office buildings, industrial complexes, oil refineries. A lot of things can come under ICI type projects. So big sector. Low-rise residential. A lot of low-rise housing. A lot of people don't want to live in a condominium. Maybe they don't live in an urban center. Maybe it's more of a suburb. That's low-rise residential. So again, different Different sectors, it also means somewhat different skills depending what you're doing in those sectors. So I think that's the first thing you need to realize is there's different sectors and there's different job opportunities. Now, that doesn't mean you can't later on shift from one sector to another. And that's one thing I just like to start right off with. Have a mindset that you can shift sectors if need be, that you can learn, adjust, and adapt because there's so many opportunities in the construction industry and it's a cyclical business. I'm going to repeat this. It's a cyclical business. That means that it's not always steady work. Some sectors are very steady. Other sectors are a little bit more up and down. So that's another consideration. What kind of sector you are thinking of going into? What area? What's your jurisdiction? What's the economy typically like? The economic cycles, and how does that work? So you want to be thinking about those kind of things because if you're going into a career, you want to have some stability. And if you're in a particular sector that's pretty volatile, then you also want to have skills where you can cross over into another sector relatively easy. And for those of us that are adaptable and flexible that way, then it makes it a lot easier. The other thing I'm going to tell you is try to be really good in the sector that you do get into. That also helps to make you more secure in your employment. You know, I'm talking about construction here, but the reality is a lot of industries and sectors are like this. So, like for example, restoration. It's a much more stable sector than, say, new low-rise residential or new high-rise residential. Restoration is like, you know, you've got a condominium tower and the curtain wall is deteriorating. Well, it needs to be fixed. People live in that building, they pay money into a monthly reserve, it's professionally managed, that money's there, good cycles or bad cycles, or their balcony slabs need repair, or their underground parking needs repair. So it's a much more stable sector than, say, low-rise residential, high-rise residential. Civil infrastructure. Now, depending on what country you're in, that can be a pretty good sector, because usually if there's a downturn in the economy, right, a down cycle, then usually governments in those economies, they recognize that there is a large group of employment in those areas. And so they usually want to attach some funding to shovel in the ground ready projects that maybe colleges, universities, other government agencies, cities, towns, states, provinces need. So in those cases, down cycle, some money goes into that helps to stabilize the industry. So that means that industry or sector can be relatively good as long as your government is got the funding ability to do it. My wife is Greek, so in Greece, they've gone through some pretty tough times over the last decade or so. So I'm not so sure that would necessarily be that stable under those circumstances. But large portions of Europe, North America, of course, very stable in those particular areas. So that's been doing very, very well that way. So you have to put things into that kind of perspective that way. Renovation. Maybe not quite as stable as restoration, but pretty stable. You know, people still, they may not do as big a renovations, but it's still a pretty resilient sector. ICI could be a little bit more volatile. Shopping malls, well, you can see what shopping malls have been going through lately. So ICI projects, they can be a little bit more up and down that way. So I would be thinking about those things. But there are a lot of crossover skills from here to here, from here to there, which are pretty easy to maneuver. So that's when we think about it. And you know, the other thing is, no one person knows everything in construction. There's what you know when you get skills in a trade or you become a project manager. And there's basically when you've got lots of experience and education, maybe myself here. And I think that's being very generous, to be honest, for what we talk about all the knowledge in construction, because there is one heck of a lot of knowledge. And then there's whatever company, even the biggest of companies, they don't know everything either. That's why they have to hire subcontractors, another whole circle of potential jobs that radiate from different trades that are used in construction. So there's a lot of opportunities that way that we can think about. And so wherever there's these knowledge gaps, they get filled. They get filled in a lot of ways by a lot of different people, including your subcontractors. We like to call them trade partners now, and consultants and suppliers. There's a lot of related industries. Subcontractors are direct, right? We don't get anything built without subcontractors or trade partners. And I'm talking about plumbers, electricians, carpenters, HVAC technologists. You could name the list, and I've got a list coming up. So that's how we fill it. We fill it as if you're a construction manager, you are very good at integrating and coordinating all these different things, because a construction project has this wealth of stuff that you got to do and coordinate. And that's the other great thing about construction. It's not boring. Construction is many things, but it is not boring. You become really good at problem solving. You become, when you get good at this, you become pretty resilient at dealing with things when they come up. Also minimizing things so they're not coming up all the time. It's a real skill and art that is developed over time with a lot of practice and perseverance. So I kind of put this little mind map together. One of my students was last semester asking me, I don't see the picture of it all. And I'll do another video on this. By the way, if you want, click subscribe. If you're into construction or you think you're going to be into construction, click subscribe, and you'll see a whole treasure trove of different lectures on introduction to construction that I get into a lot of detail. This is more careers and pathways and thinking big picture on stuff. But in construction, first of all, we kind of have to get the jobs. But once we get the jobs, then we break it down into the stuff that happens before construction, then the actual construction, and then finishing off the project. We call it closeout. At the middle, we have the site management and project team that are helping to coordinate this. This is requiring leadership skills, soft skills. Construction requires a lot of soft skills. It's not just the technical side. It's a combination of both. And so that's important. Really good people communication skills, leadership skills need to be developed. Build relationships, that needs to be developed. And ethics, we need more better ethical behavior in the construction industry. This is an industry that does trillions of dollars of work globally, and we need to ensure that it gets the professional viewpoint that it requires. So we have this management team that's in the middle that coordinates that. And we'll talk about those professions. But in here, we've got that little bubble there, trade partners. That might as well be a whole screen of potential trade coordinations of the different skill sets that you need to actually build the project. So on a very high level, very quick level, this is sort of that mind map that goes on. So you're at the middle if you're in the management team or leadership of the particular project. You may be playing a particular role that may be coming in through the pre-construction, construction, and closeout fields. Lots here, lots here. Here's the list. And this is a short list. Like, I could have sat here for hours just developing a longer list, but this is, laborers, carpenter, general. The carpentry trade is a big trade, okay? There's a lot of stuff that goes in on this. It goes back hundreds of years, and originally when you were a carpenter, you did everything. You did everything. From the rough work, the structural work, to the finish work. Nowadays, you'll find that on larger projects, there's a lot more specialization. So you might be a forming carpenter that sets up the formwork for the concrete to be poured for a high-rise building or for a water treatment facility. You may be a finish carpenter that does all the trim work and mill work that's involved in the finishes of the project. You may be a framer that works in low-rise construction that specializes in the framing of houses and roofs and the structural elements. If you're in renovations, Gets back to square one like it did 100 years ago. You may be the chief cook and bottle washer. You may do all of those. So there is different levels for different reasons, but that's a pretty big kind of core trade that you'll see in construction. There's different trades, and it depends. You got to look into each particular trade and see what it is that sort of interests you. The other thing is you may have a parent, a relative that is in a trade, and you've got this opportunity to decide to go into it. That's a consideration. You might be that you feel it that you would like to work with your hands in a particular area. So that might be there, and then you might have a opportunity in a particular area that can pull you into it. I think today we have fewer people that are fortunate enough that maybe they have a parent like I did, who when I was like 8 years old, I was working in the shop and I loved it, right? And so I got exposure to it very early on. And so I kind of grew from that. And traditionally, the way it would work is a tradesperson would become a foreperson, would become a site super, would become maybe their own business owner. There's this kind of pathway that traditionally it went, and that's still a very possible pathway for you. You become an apprentice. Now, what is an apprentice? An apprentice is somebody that's going to learn that trade. Somebody has taken them on and they are going to help them to learn that particular trade. The traditional sort of going back to the guilds in Europe, you were an apprentice, and it still is a very proud thing in Europe. Become apprentice, then you become a journey person. So once you learn that trade, the journey person is a trade person who actually knows the trade, and then they actually go to different places and learn more till they become a master of that particular trade. And once they become a master, eventually they start their own business and they do the same thing. Then they hire apprentices, and then there's this cycle that occurs. Today, in most countries, we have an apprenticeship program, and your home country will have some sort of training program. And usually that's a combination of on-the-job working, so somebody took you on as an apprentice, and going to school. And so usually the school periods might be for a couple of months. Depending on the apprenticeship, you might have to go 3 or 4 times, two to four times over a period of 3 to 5 years. And you learn the really sort of complex things in school, and you learn the real hands-on things on the job, and you combine those and you develop a really good skill set. And then to become licensed, you write some sort of examination, prove your hours, your boss certifies that you've worked this many hours in the trade, and then you are able to call yourself a licensed trade person. Now, some areas, and it depends on the country again, but most developed countries, if you're an electrician or you're a plumber or you're a refrigeration mechanic or a steam fitter or HVAC, you are going to have a license. They're like mandatory that you have to get a license to work in those trades, because you mess it up, the building burns down, or it blows up if you're working with gas, or it leaks sewer gas into the house. So there's certain regulatory requirements to make sure you become licensed. In others, it depends on the country, but like carpenter, it may be mandatory or it may be voluntary. If it's voluntary, it means you don't necessarily have to get that carpenter's license, but I would check your local country. Like for example, in Canada, we have a Red Seal program across Canada that you can become licensed under that, and most developed countries will have that sort of licensing in place. In North America, similar processes, which requires exactly what I just said, but it's voluntary, which means you don't have to have it. So then a lot of people, well, I don't need it, then I won't get it. Well, that's true. You don't have to get it. And so we're talking about pathways here. You could just, finish high school, maybe get into a trade, even not finish high school and get into a trade. Somebody got you a job in it. What I would strongly suggest, you're going to have some gaps and holes, and it kind of forces you to do that education part, that you fill those gaps and holes. And you'll also find that there may be some opportunities for you, maybe not now, but in 5, 10, 15 years, that would be a really good opportunity, and you're really good at what you do, because you can definitely get really good at being a carpenter without necessarily going to school. If you learned under somebody who was really knowledgeable, really good, and they taught you well, you will do well. But then there may be a business that wants to hire a licensed carpenter. Like most hospitals, they'll have on staff, they'll have a carpenter, and that maintenance carpenter will fix things around the hospital. It's a very steady job, pension plan, pays well, and all that. Well, you won't even be able to get in the front door because you don't have the license. Even though you might be as good as somebody else, I would suggest you get the license, because it's really not that big a deal. It's not that big a deal. You may think you're younger now, that you don't need it. I say you do, if you can do it at all. I would definitely look at that. So there are those avenues as a tradesperson. And you know what? Also, don't paint the whole industry with whoever you work with first. There are really good people out there, really good people that help and train well apprentices into tradespersons. You know, for years I helped with Home Builders Association, and I know there were some that they would hire somebody, and then 10 years later that person is still with them, and they've gone from a tradesperson to a site super to a project manager for that particular contractor, and they kind of had this internal labor market where they could get promoted. Wonderful. Great. Then I also know some, you know what, it's not a great experience for them because the employer's not great. They're only looking out for themselves and they could care less about you. But that's not indicative of the whole industry. So don't get a sour taste just with your first experience, right? Try to find somebody that you think will be good. And if you get on and somebody's not all that good, learn from them what's not good. You don't do it when you get in their position. And meanwhile, you shift, because there's lots of opportunities in construction. So a trade I highly recommend is great. It's the pathway that I happen to take. It's good that way. Like I said, there's me laying blocks when I was 20 years old. So, you know, that's the nice thing. And this was actually on my own porch when I bought a house when I was 20 years old, which was nice because you could do things. That's the other nice thing about construction and a trade. You're very good with hands, and there's always things you can fix. And people, your family members will definitely appreciate that kind of skill set, and you can definitely enjoy it. And you can also look to starting your own business at some point if you have entrepreneurial desires. You don't have to. That's the nice thing. You don't have to. But in construction, there's a lot of opportunities. Remember that circle I showed you? Well, the renovation sector, new home construction sector, renovation, you can start pretty inexpensively, right? So that doesn't require a whole lot of money. And you can even start it slow with jobs on the side, weekends, and that sort of thing. You'd be surprised how much referrals spill out from doing a few quality jobs. So it's a good feeling to have that possibility in there. So as I said, look at your opportunities that are around. Look at your particular location and where there seems to be a little bit better trends than others, because it does vary by location. Like I said, if you're in a busy urban center, there's going to be some opportunities there that there wouldn't be in other places perhaps. But other places, there might be really good opportunities, renovations, low-rise housing, flipping houses, lots of different things. Now, I kind of mentioned in the previous slide that there's a lot of trades here, and you do have a potential pathway. You get to be an apprentice, you do the school thing back and forth, and by the way, a lot of developing countries, they even pay you to go to school in apprenticeship programs. You might want to check that out too. So while you're in school, you may be able to get some government payments to support that. And usually it's only for short stretches. And in some countries, they've also gone to models where it's on weekends and evenings. So there's different choices there. So it's not, like I said, that's not that big a deal. It's not the same as going on a 4-year degree, the investment that you have to make in time that way. Definitely worth it though, as I said, don't skimp on that. But that's one pathway too, to go from apprentice to journey person to master of that particular trade. and then the potential to start your own business, right? Or master of that trade, and in many cases you might become a foreperson, and then you might become an assistant site super, then a site super. So that's a pathway within a company that is also increasing your opportunities. So construction management positions, traditionally like a site superintendent, would probably come from one of the trades. That's traditionally. I would say that's not necessarily as true today as it was 20 years ago. And project manager, I would, on larger projects, again, you look at companies, you can see a full gambit of stuff. There are project managers that maybe came from a trade and they worked at it and they did extra courses in the evenings. Maybe they did a PMP, project management professional on the side, and learned a lot about project management and got into that role. That's very possible for that. But I'm going to say that today, a lot of roles, site super still maybe 50-50. Project manager, though much higher, come from a university or college degree. So, a 4-year degree in construction management. The college I teach at, we do construction management, George Brown College in Toronto, and that is what we really work at building on is management positions in construction. And our students get into all of these particular jobs. And depending on your jurisdiction, you might not be familiar, but it might be field engineer, project coordinator. There's scheduler. There's a profession of schedulers where you're scheduling projects out. Your estimator, quantity surveyor. This is another whole big sector. So this kind of rivals the project manager, site superintendent in that it's in its pay. It pays very well. And its scope. So you could be a quantity surveyor. You could be helping for developers to work out costings for potential developments, or you could be working for banks, checking on payments and work completed and progress payments and certifying if so much work has been done. So there are a lot of, this is like a whole separate pathway onto itself. And then you've got these pathways which are more site oriented, which again, you'd be also surprised, PM, site superintendents in construction, a lot of companies, they're like equals. So it's not necessarily that the site super reports to the PM. In some companies, the site super reports to the PM. In a lot of companies, the site super and the PM, they're like equals, parallels, where the PM is dealing with more the long game of the master schedule and meeting certain milestones and closeout dates and dealing with change orders and procurements and contracts and reporting directly with the consultants and the client. And the site super is dealing with the subcontractors, the suppliers, the delivery dates, the short-term schedule. And so both of them have to work and collaborate where it joins over. So that's a big area, and it requires a lot of technical expertise and a lot of soft skills, leadership, relationships, all of those soft skills, very important. And then these positions, field engineer, field engineer, project coordinator, these can lead to these other ones. And I didn't include assistant site super, assistant project manager. They lead obviously to those positions. The other one that's higher too, you could say construction manager. Construction manager looks after a portfolio of projects typically. So they may have 3 or 4 project managers reporting to them. So there's different kind of organizational charts. Lots of things to learn in those fields, but you probably start out somewhere like a project coordinator where you're doing a lot of basic administrative work, monitoring logs, a lot of site work, etc., like monitoring the trades, the coordination, helping and assisting. And then that leads you. There's these pathways in construction. That's one of the exciting things about construction. There's pathways. You saw me. I started laying blocks, right? I started getting coffees. That's where I started. We used to my dad would give me $1 and I'd have to walk to the coffee shop. And with $1, I know I'm dating myself, I could buy 10 coffees, 10 cents a coffee, right? I started doing that. And then I started to learn a trade. I was very fortunate. I worked with some very, very good tradespeople. And then I started to, estimate. Smaller companies, you've got to estimate, you got to be a site super, you got to be a project manager. Although you're best if you give up the tools if you want to move further in the small business realm. So those are things that there's a progression if you want it. You don't have to take it. You can become the very best at any one of these trades. I have a friend, he teaches in the plumbing at George Brown College. This guy, it's like art watching this guy lay out the rough-ins for pipes. It's just like watching artwork. And you can get really good at that, and really, really good. And you will never be looking for work if you're that good, even in recessions, downtimes. So that's another thing that I love about construction is these great opportunities. And I always think about, it's about problem solving. It's about the ability to figure things out. And, that's when you get into construction, there is no dull moment. It's not a dull industry. It's a fantastic industry that way. This picture was about a year and a half ago, and my daughter they don't phone me, text me and said that they were locked out of their house. She had just bought this house. And so my son-in-law and my daughter were texting me, and he said, oh, it's okay, we're locked out. I've got a locksmith. I can get a locksmith. He'll come. And I was talking to him, and he'll be here. He can come in within 2 hours, and for $350, he'll be able to get us in. And I said, well, let me try and get you in. I'm pretty sure I can get you in. Oh, no, we don't want to bother. And my daughter in the text said, because they weren't in the same place, if my dad says he can get us in, he'll get us in, right? So I said, well, I said, I can get you in probably the second floor. I'll just take the ladder. And he said, oh, I don't have a ladder. I said, oh, yes, you do. He said, no, we don't. And I said, yeah, when I inspected the house for you before you bought it, I checked everywhere. There's a ladder behind the shed in the back. Oh, I didn't know that, right? So I got there. And I looked around, all the lower windows, they were buttoned up pretty good, but I looked up at this one up here and I thought, you know what? Likely it's not locked. And I put a little pry bar here and I pried it up, and then I crawled through the window. She took the picture from below. But that's what I'm trying to say is you can figure things out. There's, it's a very interesting business. You have these problems where there's some technical issue or some trade has an issue, and then you start collaborating. It's so much fun. It's so much fun to be able to do that. So I thought maybe I would just throw up a few questions and see if I can fare at answering them. What education do you need? Well, I think it all depends on your life position. So I have students that are 50 years old that are coming back. They were in another sector and they've always wanted to be in construction. Maybe they did well in the other sector and they've left it, but now they want to get in construction. Well, you probably can't afford to take 4 years for a degree in construction management, but you might be able to take 2 or 1. So you might look for programs that would set you up well in that particular area, right? And it depends what you're after. Is it, you want to start your own renovation business, or do you want, all of those questions come into it. If it's a trade, that's easy. You can afford to do it. You can go for the license and do the actual schooling back and forth, that sort of thing. And a lot of colleges will have opportunities to take shorter programs, like 1-year programs, to give you enough skills that you can get a base job, and then you can do the apprenticeship. So there's all these little options that are around out there. And as I also said, there's a real shortage of construction workers in most jurisdictions. So it's hard to get really skilled work. It's hard to get people that are really interested in it and professional about it enough for the amount of volume of work there is. As I said, every building that's built needs work. Almost within the first year and a half, there's already things deteriorating. Doesn't matter how good you are, things deteriorate and they need work. I visited the Colosseum and I visited the Parthenon. All of these things, they wouldn't still be up if nobody had ever done anything to them. They're constantly being restored. It's employing a whole group of people to try to keep these buildings and structures. It's not, oh, wow, the Colosseum's been there for X amount of years. Yeah, but it has had a lot of restoration to it. That's jobs, that's work. So there's lots of opportunities that way. What kind of money can I make? Well, that's hard to say because every jurisdiction is different. Toronto is different than, say, Houston is different than London, is different than Athens, and this is global when we're talking about YouTube. So you have to kind of figure that part out. Don't listen to some YouTube that says, this is what you're going to make, because it depends. It's even if you're in the same country, there's a big difference between working in Toronto and working in North Bay as far as pay goes. There are differences in more rural areas, if you will. So you need to look at that. But, and it's a big but, I would say you can do very well. If you are in a particular trade and you're good at it and you have steady work, you'll have no problem getting yourself a house or getting yourself some sort of place to live with what you make. And you can do very, very well, comparable to people that maybe get different types of degree. And I'm not into slamming degrees, right? I think going to college and university, I didn't mention it earlier, one of the biggest benefits that you get from taking a 4-year degree program is you learn to learn. Everything changes, methods, materials, but if you learn to learn, you leave there, different software program, you can figure it out. Different materials changing a different way, you can figure it out. You know how to do that. And that in today's environment is huge. So that's why I'm pro on that aspect. Now, some of you, you're really good at learning on your own and you really are focused at that and you're disciplined at that. Well, that's different. But for most of us, that's where the advantage is with the college or university side. But if you can take a program that's going to get you some really good applied opportunities and you've learned how to learn, now you've kind of got a good sort of thing going for you. And over your time in college, university, if you do go, try to get summer jobs in the sectors. Talk to your professors, talk to people in the trades, that kind of experience really accelerates your learning, hands-on. Again, you're going to hear people that hands-on, that's all you need. It's great. Hands-on is good. I've done it myself. I kind of did things backwards. I didn't mention that, but I did 2 trades. I didn't go to university. I actually did very well in the trades when I was actually in trade school. I got my original job at the college because I was really good at the trades part while I was in school, but I quickly realized I'm going to need a degree because I won't survive in this realm unless I do that. So I did a business degree part-time and I did an MBA part-time, right? That's that aspect of learning. Now, if I could have done it younger, maybe that would have been a lot easier for me than doing a full-time job and doing the other, but I still think it's important. So having done both, I'm just giving you my 2 cents worth in this view of it. So that's why I think you should seek a formal education. That opportunity to learn how to learn and to learn things really well. And you know what? When you get out there, things won't be exactly what you learned. But as long as you know how to learn and you've got the basics, that's gonna accelerate you. What are the job prospects? Depends, again, on the sector we talked about. Depends on the economy. So it depends on your risk tolerance, right? So I kind of gave you an overview of some that are very risky, like not risky, but there's more peaks and valleys. Then there is others that it's a little bit more steady, but it depends, right? Depends on your jurisdiction and where your opportunities are. How steady is employment? Okay, so if you're really good, it's very steady. So, I would say if you can be in the top 30%, even 35, 40% of your sector, I think you're going to have a very good career. You're going to have some places where maybe your company goes bankrupt or it's really slow, the economy. You know what? You get to be good. You keep your job. Or construction industry, it's a huge industry, but it's a small industry. People know who is good. People know who is really good at what they do. So it's a big industry, but it's a small industry. Shoot for that. And there's no harm in the Pareto principle. Shoot to be in that top 20%, and that's going to lead you to the higher 80% of income in that sector. So I would always try to shoot for that. So yes, if you're at the bottom 20%, it's not great. I'm going to tell you right now, it's not great. Construction's not a forgiving industry. If you're at the bottom 20% of the sector, it's going to be very cyclical. My wife has somebody that she knows really, really well, and she was saying, well, how come they're always out of work and they're in the construction sector? I said, because they're not very good at what they do, right? It's just being truthful, and especially seeing it's been a boom market in our area for like 20 years, and they've been unemployed for at least half that time. It's a problem. So I'm not trying to pull any punches there, right? But you know what? I could be talking about any kind of career, and I don't think it's going to be that much different. It's kind of a mindset that you got to think, and that ties back to the learn to learn. How is it to start my own business? Probably one of the better sectors of all the sectors. I just mentioned all those different trades. Each one of them, if you got a license in that, that's an opportunity at some point for you to start a business. I don't know how many students I run into at different places that they eventually started their business and they have 10, 15, 20 people working for them. It's a huge opportunity. So you don't have to necessarily start out and be a big developer. You start out small, and then you grow it from there. And then depending on the business skills, that's where a good basis can help you. Like a university degree in construction management can be very helpful. But even if not, just having that trade and having an attitude towards figuring things out, because that's what construction does. It leads to that figuring out how I'm going to do something, and gives you kind of a, not to quote Nike, let's just do it, right? Just do it. So I would say lots of opportunities there. And how does this kind of work compare to other work? Like I said, you know what? It is, if you're in a trade, it can be very hard physically. That's another thing you want to consider. Which trade are you getting into? When you're 19, it's a little bit different than when you're 40, and it's different than when you're 60. It just depends. My dad was in construction until he was 79, and he was on the construction sites, and he loved the work. He hated the business side. So that's why I kind of got saddled with it very, very young, the business side, but he loved the hands-on, the carpentry side and being on site. So it depends on, it does get to a lot of people physically, if you're a tile setter and you're on your knees a lot, over time that can cause a lot of issues. So you probably would look at a pathway. Well, maybe I start here, and then maybe I move up to a position in management, or I start my own business, and then I have other people doing the actual trade part. So you think about things long term. Play the long game. You got to play the short game, but also think of the long game in construction. And it's a great industry for that. So to other work, I think it's a huge win. Now, think about this. It's not easy to outsource this to another country. How do you outsource this to another country? How do you outsource this to another country? Very, very difficult, right? Very difficult. What you can do is, and I kind of skipped over it, BIM specialist, building information modeling. If you're into computers and you're into design and you're into scheduling and all, the convergence of everything is happening in construction right now. Right now is the time for this. There's jobs now in building information modeling that did not exist 10 years ago. Lots of jobs in this sector. So that's another huge area. Where could some of it go? It could go to manufacturing. Some of it could go to prefab. Some of it could go to 3D printing. There's a lot of technologies on the horizon. But at the same time, you know what? There's still going to be a ton of stuff that needs to be done hands-on, like renovation work, that sort of thing. And the parts that go to prefab and BIM, all that means is they need to be better coordinated and better managed. So that's not going to diminish the need for these kind of jobs. Keep that in mind. Now, I would also be cognizant of some trades. If you see something that maybe is going to make a trade less in demand or things of that nature. You've always got to be attuned to these things. The world is constantly changing, but of all the industries, construction is one of the most resilient in those sectors. It's going to be one of the last ones that AI impacts. It can impact it. You just have to Google and look at AI drywall taping, AI bricklaying, and all of those kinds of things. And you'll see some of the things that are coming out. But it's still going to be a while on that, I think, before it's to the broader industry. And I think there are tons of opportunities in the meantime. And it still needs a lot of coordination and setup. So there are great opportunities in that. So I think in this sector, I think it's one of the most resilient in a world that is fast changing. So I used to, I was guilty of this myself. I've been teaching and advising students for decades. Follow your passion. It's kind of a cliche. Follow your passion. And I've given it a lot of thought. And my passion is also leadership and project management. I've written books in project management and understanding construction drawings and things of that nature. And I'm very passionate about what I do, but I was also very fortunate. I started when I was 10 years old on construction sites, believe it or not. I think I often say my dad would be in handcuffs and I'd be in childcare services today. But at any rate, I loved it. And I got to find out what it was like at a very young age. So I became passionate of it at a young age, and I became very good at it at a young age because I practiced it, right? I don't think that you can't know getting into something if you're for sure passionate about it, if you really haven't done it for a while. And the other thing is that happens, I think a lot of people might get into a job and they're not even really necessarily passionate about it, but then they start to build a skill set and a knowledge, and they start to notice that people are coming to them for things. And then they start to see that they're getting better at this. And then that kind of drives their motivation and pushes them to learn more. And then all of a sudden it becomes this sort of snowball effect where you get more knowledgeable and more understanding about the area, build better relationships, and then it's kind of like you're in this zone of flow when you go to work, and you just enjoy it, and it's just this great thing. That's where you can follow your passion, but the problem is you don't know it yet. So you might have to try a few different things within the sector and see and test it out. Maybe you tried the trade thing for a bit and you thought, I like construction, I see what it's about, but you know what, I don't want to be in the trade for that long. So maybe you go into and apply for a degree program, or you try the degree program and you come out and you get a management position and you decide, you know what, I see what the trades are doing, I kind of like to try that. Nothing locks you in, for good in construction. You can try different things, and if you build certain skill sets in one area, they are relatively transferable to other areas. There's always a learning curve, but they are relatively transferable, and it's actually an asset for you. As I tell my students from the degree program, if you get a chance to even work a summer with the tools or helping a trade, it gives you a good perspective. One of my professors at University of Toronto in building science said the best architects are ones that grew up on a farm. Why? Because on a farm, when a trailer breaks, you have to fix it. When the roof leaks, you fix it. When the door jams, you fix it. You figure it out. You know how to work with tools, and that means you know how to design things a little bit better because you understand a little bit better how things go together. Don't close your eyes to other areas. Always be trying to learn more in those areas. And you can think about a job in construction. You can think about construction as a job. I get paid for it, right? Think about it as a job. I get paid for it. You can think about it as a career or a profession, or you can think of it as a calling. And I love to think of construction, if you worked at it enough and you really put the effort to get good at it, then it's going to become a calling. There's no better industry for that. I was in London a little while ago, and the architecture, restoration of older architectural features, York Abbey, St. Paul's, Westminster Abbey, Big Ben. Like these things take a lot to build them originally. Can you imagine with the technology back then? But also the restoration work that's involved, maintaining these buildings. But then it doesn't have to be that. If you're building a new house for somebody, that's going to be somebody's home. They're going to live in it. You're going to be building this for a family to raise their kids, to have a life together. You could be building a sewage treatment plant. You're stopping the spread of disease in that community. Hospital, you're helping to cure the public. What better profession than construction? So that's what I wanted to say, and I'll leave you with this. Be so good they can't ignore you, and enjoy the journey. Be so good they can't ignore you, and enjoy the journey. Old Steve Martin book, I think. Be so good they can't ignore you. So I'm Tom Stephenson, wishing you a wonderful day, and I hope you enjoy a calling in construction, and wishing you all the best. Bye for now. Oh, one more thing. Make sure you subscribe to my YouTube channel. As I said, I have a lot of videos there that can help you, sort of decide a little bit heads up ahead of time what may be of interest to you or not. Bye for now.